be hard to put it in my house, which is all about, like the right women. It's all about women. Has these amazing portraits of women in there, all, abstract, well, impressionistic, not abstract. Her husband is an artist. He does all abstract. I could have spent $20,000 in there today without even, so I had to get out of there. So we just got back, but I am going to get a couple of her pieces when I get back. But
That's nice.
it's just the stuff I love. Really bright colors. I have a tremendous collection of artists out of East LA that I have either at home or at the clinic. So I love the super vibrant, art with all those colors in it. And this gal's got it down pat. So we just barely got back to the hotel 5 minutes ago.
Well, that is great. And it's nice to take a break from, it's always nice to travel and change your perspective on things when you're mired in so much crazy chaos and what we're dealing here with. Not specifically by LA, but just generally.
Well, the election, I get approximately, 40 messages asking for money every day.
Sorry about that.
Which is okay because I'm donating, far and wide.
All right.
So it's not
I think Steph is asking us to start. I didn't know that Judy was not going to be here. That's true, Linda?
That is correct. Judy cannot make it today.
Oh, darn, because I saw her name on all the stuff. Okay, so I will, recording is happening, and on behalf of Judy Abdo, I'd like to call the meeting to order. So the meeting is called to order. Let's see, we have Astrid Hager and Frank Ramos, just the three of us. Is that right, Linda? Okay.
That is correct.
Okay, cool. Do we have any public comment?
We do not have any public comments.
Okay, so we could just stay on this current Zoom link and go to the next item?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. So we do have minutes to review from the October 14th minute. Is there a motion to receive and file these meeting notes?
I move.
Okay, thank you. All right, so there we go on that. And the next item is item 4, which is the proposed amendments to bylaws and governance guidelines. And this will be information led by Peter Barth and Sarita Young. Good to go?
Great.
Peter and Sarita? All right.
Good to go. Thank you all so much for the extra time. And I'm hoping everyone can see my screen. Wonderful. Thanks for the confirmation. And thank you so much, Commissioner Hager, for joining us from Egypt. Look forward to hearing more about the trip. So as a reminder, we're coming back to the executive committee, given the conversation we had at the October board, to talk through in a little bit more detail the context for, the intention for, and various proposed amendments to our bylaws and governance guidelines. As you all will recall, we talked last November with the executive committee and the full board about a lot of the different changes that were happening. For example, we were in the middle of the process for creating an executive director succession plan. We had just passed and approved final emergency authorities to the board. We had just updated our meeting cadence, and we noted that all of those things would likely trigger a need to revisit components of our bylaws and governance guidelines to make sure that they remained accurate and up to date. And so in March, when we had our first executive committee meeting, we forecasted that with all these changes, we would learn a little bit and bring that back to the executive committee, which we did in September. And I just want to acknowledge we clearly didn't provide enough information in a clear enough way. And so we're coming to you today, not just with the memo outlining all of the changes, and also the changes themselves, but wanted to walk through just some of the context, the intent, and the categories so we can have a clarifying conversation. And at the end of today's meeting, what we really hope to know is, should we continue to move forward with trying to clean these bylaws and amendments up at the next board meeting next week, or not? That's what we want to make sure we're in alignment with the executive committee. So with all that in mind, I'm just going to walk through a couple of pieces of information, and then we'll open it up for clarifying questions with Sarita, as she is our obvious expert for our governance reasons and counsel to the board. So first, just some context around our governance documents. First, after California voters passed Proposition 10 back in 1998, the County Board of Supervisors had to pass a motion actually establishing the commission. And so that established membership and a lot of the rules we have. And it's just a reminder, so our board can't impact that county motion, but what our board can impact are our bylaws and our governance guidelines. And so our bylaws are the document that was approved by the First 5LA Commission to make sure that we were complying with government code and providing rules for our operations. And then our governance guidelines didn't actually exist really until 2014, when First 5LA was commissioned, given our significant shifts and some of the history of the organization, said we need to make sure that we're supporting government standards and also aligning with the new strategic vision for the organization. So that's where the governance guidelines come in. And as our council will always tell us, bylaws will trump governance guidelines if there's ever misalignment, but our intent is to always make sure that those two documents are aligned and mutually reinforcing of each other. Also some context, because we heard some questions from the board in October about board membership. So just a reminder that our board has 9 voting members, and our voting members are 5 of them are appointed by county supervisors. We have 3 that are representing county departments. And as we explained in October, those 3 rotate among 4 different county departments. So the Department of Children and Family Services, Department of Public Health, Department of Mental Health, and the LA County Office of Education. And then we have 1 voting member who is actually representing the Board of Supervisors. And then we have 4 non-voting ex officio members. So when we talk about ex officio in our context, it means those 4 people who are appointed to our board, serve on our board, inform and influence the board, but don't vote on items. And those, as outlined in county code, represent the Interagency Council on Child Abuse and Neglect, so ICAN, a representative from the Child Care Policy Roundtable, a representative from the Commission for Children and Families, and then whoever the non-voting county department appointee is based on that rotation that we just described above. And then one more item in context, which is our bylaw requirements. So every year the board must elect a chair, and it has to be in the first full board meeting of the year. So traditionally that's been in February. Then the chair appoints a vice chair and committee chairs and vice chairs for the various committees. Right now, the board and committee leadership positions must be filled by one of those 9 voting members. And so as you can imagine, and as it's happened lately, and we'll talk more about this in just a minute, that constrains the number of people we can tap into to do the work of committee leadership, which, as you all know, can be significantly time consuming above and beyond regular board meetings. So just a quick note before we walk around into the different categories. What are our intentions for updating our bylaws and guidelines? So first of all, as we've noted, there are a lot of components of our bylaws and guidelines that are outdated. They refer to past strategic plans, refer to past practices no longer used to advance our work. And with that in mind, we want to make sure that a new board chair and executive director doesn't have to do cleanup as one of their first actions in office. As this third point calls out on the slide, we're confident that a new board chair and executive director may want to further update and refine bylaws more substantively. And if that were to happen, staff would absolutely support them in creating a process to engage with the board to discuss that, reflect that, potentially make further amendments. At a minimum, our hope is that we can ensure our governance documents are at least current and accurate for a new board chair and new executive director. We would really love not to have them walk in and say, why do our bylaws talk about a 2015 to 2020 strategic plan? So with that in mind, I'll walk through 6 categories. So this is page 1. There's just 2 pages to talk about the different changes that you have outlined in detail in the memo. And then we'll pause for questions, clarifying discussion, and about our next steps. So first, as I was just referencing, we want to update a couple of spelling errors and dates and references to old strategic plan. So throughout both our bylaws and governance guidelines, one of our requirements is that we as an organization have to be able to pass work and do work that's in alignment with our strategic plan. But our documents currently say specifically the 2015-2020 strategic plan. So rather than continuing to refer to a specific time strategic plan, we would like for the documents to say to our current board approved strategic plan. And that way we can just always have that reference and requirement and not have it be tied to a specific timeline. The second category is removing references to practices that are less rigorous adopted by the board today. So an example of this, in our bylaws and in our governance guidelines, it says we must adopt a 5-year long-term financial projection. And as you will recall, our board decided a few years ago that given our financial circumstances, we needed to plan farther ahead than 5 years. So we currently adopt a 10-year financial forecast. And so we have changes throughout the document that we want to make that refer to, rather than referring to the requirement for a 5-year plan, that we must have at a minimum a 5-year plan. So the commission will we will have no fewer than a 5-year projection plan, but we can go further. We can continue to have a 10-year plan as we think is needed. Another example of a practice that was brought up in the October board meeting was about expiring initiatives. And I wasn't part of the organization at the time, but I know very well that when I joined the organization, we were dealing with the fact that the board at the time had approved hundreds and hundreds of contracts without clear end dates, without clear line of sight to sustainability. And so part of the governance guidelines say, and we are not recommending any changes to this, that we need to make sure action items for the board have at least an informational hearing and also have an action hearing so that there's plenty of transparency with the board decisions, and that contracts need to have a clear end date, need to have a clear sustainability plan. And so we knew that over time, everything that the board had approved would have clear line of sight for sustainability, clear line of sight to end dates. And if we were to change that, we would need the board to approve it again. But we also knew, as in 2014, there were hundreds and hundreds of contracts that didn't have that requirement in place. And so we put into place this practice through the governance guidelines of every year, we're going to make sure that the board has line of sight into what's ending, because the board wouldn't know that otherwise. We are now caught up. And so as of 2018, we were no longer needing to do that expiring process because everything that we had on the books had those clear end dates, had those clear sustainability approaches and plans. And so that's why we recommend removing that reference to that practice, because it's no longer needed. We are, of course, though, maintaining the practice we have in place as we making sure that anything that we're bringing to the board is complying with those governance guidelines. Finally, we want to make sure that our bylaws and governance guidelines acknowledge board-approved policies that have been adopted over the course of the past year. So we already made some cleanup to align with the new procurement policy, but the examples that I was sharing earlier, for example, an executive director succession plan, or the emergency authorities, back at the start of the pandemic, you may recall, we had to adopt emergency authorities ad hoc and get approval after the fact. Well, we now have an emergency plan in place. So there are a number of changes throughout the memo you can see that are just referring to those policies that have been adopted by the board. So we want to make sure that they're accurate there. So those are the categories of changes on the first page. And here's the 3 final ones. First, we want to make sure, to that point of succession plan, right now it's not clear if a committee chair were not in place, that a vice chair could step in and chair a meeting. It's not that it's prohibited, it's just not very clear. So there are a number of changes in just trying to make sure it's really clear the role that alternates can play, the role that committee vice chairs can play to keep our work moving forward. We also want to make sure that there isn't an expectation that the board is meeting every single month for a full board meeting, every month for a PPC meeting, every few months for budget and finance, plus executive committee meetings. As some of our longer serving board members will recall, especially some of our ex officio members who've been on the board for quite some time, there was a point in time where if you were a member of the First 508 board and you were a voting member and you were on committees, you were meeting up to 40 times a year. And so one of the things we've done with the support from Supervisor Kuehl has been using that board chair's authority to make some changes. Let's not meet in December. Let's not meet in August. And so what we're proposing here is just setting the expectation that there are a minimum number of board meetings that we must have. It protects the ability for a board chair to convene meetings whenever work needs it. But we don't want the base expectation that if you're a member of a First 508 board, you're going to be meeting 2 or 3 times a month moving forward. And so it's a change that reflects current practice. It's not making any further changes to our board cadence. And then finally, providing flexibility for the chair to appoint an ex officio member to serve in leadership roles on the program and planning committee. So as we noted earlier, since right now, out of our 13 board members, only 9 can serve in committee leadership, for the PPC in particular, we know that our ex officio members may have the skills and expertise needed to help lead that committee. And we just want a board chair to be able to have the option, if needed, to make those appointments. And I know that this year this was particularly true because we have a lot of commissioners who have very demanding day jobs, Dr. Frere being an example, you all as an example. And we just want to make sure that a future board chair has options if needed to move forward. So it's not guaranteeing anything. It's not changing the voting rights for any commissioner. That would require county motion, back to that opening slide. But we just want to make sure that the chair has flexibility. So with all that in mind, here are the questions we want to make sure that we're talking about today, we get to today. So first, I will pause, I'll pull down the slides and we can have any outstanding questions or clarifications, anything that's not clear with Sarita. But we also want to be able to get your feedback to ensure that we're clear. Do we have support to bring this back to the board and next week in November 10th? And if so, can we bring the full package of proposed amendments next week? So those are the 3 questions we want to get through. But first, I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can have a conversation.
Okay. Well, for me, one of the questions or ideas, concerns that came up in the whole search for the ED process was, I feel like the board members want more interaction with each other. They want to, it's not necessarily meeting for official board meetings, but it's more opportunities for us to talk to each other and bond with each other, go to events. I mean, I know this is all pre-pandemic and, but I think there's a thirst for us to, go to a site visit together, 3 or 4 of us or whatever, a retreat. I don't know what it is. I would really like to work with a new ED on this opportunity because I think we need to do this. And I think in the past, we've sort of felt like, oh, we're not able to, I don't know. There just hasn't been, we were worried maybe if it was like, could we, I don't know what, but I think that's the spirit that I'm picking up on from many of us. So Sarita, could you sort of clarify, like, if 4 of us went out to lunch together, is that possible? Or if we went to did a site visit with Dr. Hager, like what are the parameters for that?
Well, certainly you're still subject to the Brown Act, right? So you just can't have more than 5 or more of you. So of the voting members, if there's a total of 9, you can't have 5 or more of you convening together.
Okay, but 4 of us could, right?
4 of you could. You also, though, want to be mindful that, let's say you've split it up into groups of 4, 4, 1. And although those are individual gatherings, there is the potential for then the 2 groups of 4, or maybe a group of 4 and the 1 to somehow communicate around whatever that one meeting was, if it happens to be related to board business.
Okay, no.
And then if that happens, then we've run into a meeting violation.
I understand that. What we're talking about more is if Dr. Hager, myself, Frank, and someone else went to visit Dr. Hager, had lunch with her, and did a tour of her program.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, that's not a meeting as long as you're not discussing first 5 business.
Okay,
And
I think-
Commissioner Martinez, oh, please go ahead, Commissioner Hager.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think to your point as well, part of the experience we're having from a board and operation standpoint is transitioning back to opportunities for in-person. So this is one thing pre-pandemic that we were working with staff on is how do we proactively identify, hey, here's a meeting coming up, here's an event, here's a site visit we think will be helpful for staff. Let's invite commissioners, let's figure that out. And we've done it consistently with things like our advocacy day. But now that we are able and more of our partners are doing those in-person spaces, what I'm hearing from you, and I think it resonates a lot with the work we've been trying to do is, let's make sure that we can do that, especially as we walk into 2023, identify those opportunities to proactively engage commissioners more with our teams, with our partners in the community, and to do so in compliance with the Brown Act. So I'm hearing that loud and clear, and that's what I know Linda and Jamie and I have been thinking about in terms of what can we do more of as we think about 2023.
okay.
You know, I think the other thing that was concerning was the timing of bringing this forward to the whole board versus, you know, from the executive committee. And I think some of us felt that in light of the fact that we have a new chair coming and a new CEO coming, that this would be more appropriate to put off for a couple of months so that they would have an opportunity to understand, you know, what was going on and raise any additional questions or queries that they had about the bylaws, and wouldn't feel like everybody had rushed in and made changes to things just before they came in and were chairing or acting as CEOs. I don't think there was any attempt by the executive committee to say this isn't a good idea or we shouldn't do that or whatever. It was the timing of moving in that direction that was concerning, and that, you know, one of the things that I would certainly like to look at would be the idea of what we're recommending, what we would recommend if we reviewed the bylaws and all the rules and regs, and what maybe additional things we would want to recommend that we change, but we thought it should be done with the new leadership. Is that a fair statement of it? Frank?
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to add, I do think the next ED needs to weigh in. What I saw though, Peter, I thought was reasonable.
Yeah, this first, I mean, it seems reasonable, and I really am glad that you took the time to further explain it, because it does make sense. Nothing in here is, like Dr. Hager said, problematic. It was just timing. And it was, maybe it was mentioned, but I don't know, there was so much going on. It didn't really set in until we were all together, and then just felt like a little rushed, you know?
Yeah, understandable. I think that gets to a couple of the questions that I was posing, which is, as we think about potential next steps, one option is that we work to have the board approve a subset of some of the amendments that are truly focused just on the accuracy space at the November meeting, and hold off those that, while still intended to support new leadership, could benefit from new leadership weighing into a future moment in the new year. Another option is that we present these holistically to the board in November, just as further information in writing, so that we can say, hey, here's what we discussed with the executive committee. There weren't any flags on the changes, but for purposes of action, the recommendation was to wait until the new year with new leadership's endorsement to take action. So for example, we could look at February board meeting being a chance where the board is actually taking formal action, which would give the chance for a new ED or chair to weigh in. So I think there are a lot of options we have, and I think we just want to make sure from a staff perspective that we're really clear whatever we do in terms of next steps with the full board and seeking approval aligns with where the executive committee is supportive. We don't want to be bringing something to the full board that doesn't reflect your thoughts.
Well, I think I probably would vote in the direction of revisiting this after new leadership has come on board. And the one thing that does happen with this, Peter, which is really good, particularly depending on who becomes the new chair, since there's now going to be some changes within the board, it forces them to actually read and think about what the bylaws and the rules are, and understand it more than just inheriting things that's been changed. I just don't like, I would not like, if I were the one coming in as a CEO, that just before it came in, rules were changed.
Astrid, what do you think about sharing it as info only on November 10th? Do you think we should, and I think you just said it, wait till the new ED, we just want to double check. You prefer that we wait instead of sharing as info on November 10th?
I think that's fine, actually. I don't have any objection to that, Frank. I'm just thinking that if I came into a new leadership position and found out that the month before they decided to change the rules, I would be a little put out.
So,
Yes.
so Astrid, if I could ask a question, just to clarify, Peter endeavored to share with the executive committee explicitly the different categories of changes. And so I think there's some substantive differences, at least in my mind, but this ultimately is a determination for you all to make, between updating dates and references to old strategic plans and removing references to outdated practices and aligning with board approved policies. I'm curious how you see that as changing the rules. Because I mean, if I were a new ED reading the governance guidelines and seeing references to the 2015-2020 strategic plan, I'd be like, huh? So it's just like, as Peter said, one of the drivers, the major motivator here has been to align update the bylaws and the governance guidelines to be consistent with current practice and board policy. The one area where there is, arguably a change in the rules is that the issue Peter called out about providing the chair with flexibility to appoint an ex officio member to serve or to chair the PPC. That is a rule change, but it's intended not to constrain a new ED, but to provide a new ED and a new chair flexibility. So I'm just curious to better understand the references I'm hearing you make to changing the rules when the intent and the proposals is to align with existing board policy and organizational practice.
I'm just saying, again, I think it would be to our advantage to give new leadership the opportunity to review and understand these changes as they're voted in. And that makes them more in tune with the things that need to be updated or changed. And they can put their input on it, which I would be very interested in hearing. And it's, Kim, why is it necessary to do it now versus in January? What is the urgency that it get done now?
Yeah, and that's totally fair, Astrid. And Peter explained why we are where we are with the timing, given the board actions that have been taken. And as we shared with the executive committee at the end of the last year and a number of times earlier this year, this has always been on the list of priorities for the executive committee and the board. And it's the last board meeting of the year, which provides us a chance to get it cleaned up in time for new leadership. But you're absolutely right. This is not a hill for anyone to be dying on. This is intended as a cleanup. And, since we had a discussion with the executive committee earlier and then heard concerns at the board meeting, we wanted to have this opportunity to dig in a little bit more and hear more from you all directly about some of the concerns and questions. And if it's the will of the committee, a recommendation of the full board not to even touch the ministerial cleanups until the next ED and chair are in, then that's what we'll report back to the board.
Well, I guess that would be my vote, that we don't. I mean, I can understand the logic behind it, but I don't understand the timing. And so I would just be more comfortable with taking a conservative approach. And in all frankness, Kim, when a lot of this was presented some time ago, we didn't know that we would be in the midst of a new search for an executive director. We knew that there would be a new chair coming in, but we didn't know there was going to be a new executive director. And honestly, I just, it's not the content that distresses me, it's the timing.
Okay.
And I would like to give my vote of confidence to the new chair and the new executive director to read it and see what, and I think it would be a good educational process for the new chair, whoever comes in from the board, to have somebody go over those things, just like Peter so eloquently just did, to say, these are the things that we want to change. And thereby, it's not only letting them participate in it, but they're also learning to understand why we want those changes made, or updates, excuse me, or cleanups, or whatever we want to call it, so that they understand it better. I think it's just, it just feels, I'm just more comfortable with that.
So what would be the timing to do this would be in February?
Yeah, so I was actually just doing a quick sidebar with Sriti because I wanted to make sure that there were no legal concerns with us not changing the accuracy pieces. That's the one thing that I
Right.
just would love to make
accuracy
sure that we're not
pieces-
sideways.
I feel like, outdated dates and typos and things like that, like I don't have an issue with, but the, ex officio composition, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so February?
So February. So the good news is there are no legal concerns with us doing this early next year. So what would happen, my recommendation would be that we still provide an updated written information to the full board in November, just to close the loop from the
Yeah.
October meeting to
I
make
think
sure
the
that they're
presentation
aware.
you did would just, it doesn't have to be 25 minutes, but
Right.
is a
right.
really good, it was really, really, really good and helpful.
Thanks. With that, I think what we would probably do is include the presentation as a written update, and I would maybe just say a few brief words to orient
good.
to the materials. Just given the other very important things we have on the agenda for
Yeah.
next week. But then what that would allow us to do is at the February board meeting, have this be an action item. And by then, while technically that's when a board chair would be named, we would have at least had the opportunity to consult with the executive director and with our new representative from the Board of Supervisors to make sure that there's no discomfort there.
Okay.
Kim?
Peter,
Oh, yeah.
Peter, I
Go
just
ahead,
want to
please.
say, I'm sorry. I want to say the first few slides that talked about context, I think was perfect, because we all saw the confusion last time. I was scratching my head a little bit too, probably because I'm one of the newer commissioners, but I think that's great because it's going to clarify so much. There's a lot of, wait a minute, hold on, what's going on here last time? So I think that's great.
I think that's good, helpful direction from committee members. And my only question I'd encourage folks to consider is in the context of everything that a new executive director is focusing on. If the individual, depending upon where they're starting, a board book for a February meeting has to be approved internally at least about 10 days before that meeting. So it's just a question to consider. Is this the highest priority to be putting demands on a new ED's time and a new chair's time? I think Astrid's point is very well taken about this approach will require them to spend a little bit of time in better understanding the governance guidelines. I'm not sure if, notwithstanding the importance of these cleanup items, they would necessarily rise to the first thing for their first couple of weeks, but that's just something for you all to consider.
Well, I think he or she can handle it. Peter and John will help them out.
Just to
Great.
add to that, a really good example is one of the cleanups involves our reserve policy, which is very outdated in the governance guidelines. And so I think the new executive director, we're going to be spending a fair amount of time early on briefing them on preparing a new budget, which comes before the board in the spring. And that's an example where our governance guidelines says the reserve should be built one way, but our practice and updated policies say it should be built another way. So if I were, and hopefully I will be advising the new executive director, the focus will be on the budget. And we'll call out those areas for cleanup as you're suggesting, which may not happen exactly in February, but definitely, when he or she has time to focus on that.
And I would only add to the discussion too. So with February, we just have to keep in mind that given that it's usually our first meeting where we're selecting the chair of the board and all of the chairs of the various committees, I think it'll be important when we come back to the board for the November meeting with the written that states, as substantively, the executive committee is good with the proposed changes, but really just wants the new executive director to understand them and be supportive of them as well. So that in that time frame in between then and February, they can propose or work with the new chair around these changes as if, hopefully the full board will actually be supportive of it. And kind of gear, because the rest of the agenda will be geared towards like selecting the chair and the committee chairs. And Kim, are you shaking?
Well, the committee chair selection has traditionally been done per the bylaws by the chair. So that's what we're just thinking through the sequencing of that a little bit is going to be important.
But meaning, is it announced during the February meeting?
Yeah, the chair makes the vice chair convenes the meeting, and the board nominates a chair and votes on that, and then the chair names the committee members.
Well, we might have to restructure. We might have to restructure the February meeting to like immediately act on, have the board consider the bylaws, the proposed amendments, and then flow through the rest of the meeting as we normally would, just to ensure that as the chair has been, or who we think the chair might be, as they've been thinking through committee assignments, that hopefully what they've done is now in alignment with what we're proposing under the amendments. It's gonna take some finessing of that meeting. It can get done, but the meeting won't flow as it traditionally has.
I would encourage you all to think carefully about that. I'm hearing an intent, a desire not to have a new chair and a new ED feel like something's being pushed upon them. And the scenario I hear you just put out as a strong dog, Sarita, I think would require the new chair and ED to be comfortable with those changes as the very first action they're taking, because there's an assumption that that chair would have the flexibility to name an ex officio member. And if that's what the committee is recommending, then that's good for the full board to hear in November.
Sarita, just to clarify, and that I think it's important for the full executive committee to be on the same page with this. What you described would only be necessary if for some reason a voting member is not available to serve as PPC chair. So it's only if the intention is that a new chair needs to, because of a lack of capacity among a voting member, appoint an ex officio to some version of a leadership position.
Exactly.
So far, we have not been forced to do that, thanks to all of you on the executive committee being willing to step into leadership roles. And so as long as that were to remain the case with new board members in the new year, we wouldn't have to finesse. It's really only the consequence here, so we're all clear, is it's only if for some reason there was no ability for a board chair to appoint a voting member to committee leadership, that not having these bylaws approved in advance would be problematic. But otherwise, according to our usual standard operating procedures, we would be fine and we wouldn't have to finesse the meeting otherwise. So
Agreed.
Hoping that all on this executive committee would be willing to continue in service and transition so that we can allow this to take place.
That's an important distinction, Peter. Yes.
Great.
We would only have to rearrange the meeting in the event that it's determined that we don't have a voting member to chair the PPC.
Okay, well, I know I'm already for me. I'm gonna be at a wedding out of state on that day, so I won't be there in person, and hopefully I can be there via Zoom.
Great. Thank you all very much. So what I'm hearing then as concurrence from the three of you and the executive committee is that we will share with updated information, this information with the board so that we're fully aware. You endorse the changes, but want to make sure that we're giving new leadership a chance to review. And then our intention will be to work with the new executive director once named, and our new representative from the Board of Supervisors to facilitate the transition and potential action at February board, as Kim noted, pending other priorities. In the event this isn't the highest priority to get done, we may have it at a different full board meeting, but just want to keep the work moving forward.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Yes, agreed.
Agreed.
Okay,
Super
Great,
helpful.
appreciate
Thank you, Peter. Nice job. And thank you, board members, for the thoughtful feedback and direction. So I think we are on a path, and Astrid in particular, want to thank you for dialing it in from halfway across the world, and hope you continue to have really remarkable and exhilarating and safe travels and experiences.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll do it. Thanks, everybody.
thanks,
Appreciate
everyone.
you accommodating this time frame.
Thank you.
All right. All
We'll
right.
see you next
Thanks,
week.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Frank.
everyone.
See you next
Bye.
week. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
I hope there wasn't public comment.
No, there was not a public comment,
Okay.
but I didn't hit the unmute button fast enough, and I was trying to get in for the record that we are confirming that we're officially adjourning for the record.
Okay.
But I didn't hit the unmute button fast enough. But
Okay.
no, we're good. Okay, thanks, guys.
All right.
Thank you.